And in this episode of the Real Talk podcast, we've got a really interesting chat for you to listen to. I've got Rogan down from Oxhorn Limeworks, who's come over from Sheffield. They specialise in restoring, refurbishing traditionally built properties in the Yorkshire region. Rogan and his business partner Josh, yes, that's not a joke, are all passionate about traditionally built buildings, especially the Victorian ones. Rogan is encouraging a growth and network of trades who understand the different types of buildings and how these buildings have different needs and characteristics that people need to be aware of. He shares the origin of their business and its purpose, and I even ask him the big question, does rising damp exist? I hope you enjoy. That's so confusing.
Just call me Pal.
Pal, yeah. Rogan, thanks for coming across from Sheffield, right?
Yes.
Yeah. To come on Real Talk podcast today. Introduce yourself, mate, to those that's listening.
So, my name's Rogan Parkin. I'm from Oxhorn Limeworks. We're a restoration company that specialises in restoring buildings and trying to find sustainable building practices through traditional methods.
Sustainable building practices. What do you mean by that?
Well, so there seems to sustainability and that sort of thing is becoming at the forefront of people's minds now. And it seems to us to be that the general consensus is that modernity will solve all the problems. And we think personally that, particularly in buildings and I guess in other stuff in life, it goes in troughs.
Yep.
So you get high points and low points and so on. And we think that the high points in the history of construction are things that we can learn from so that we can make a sustainable building future.
Yeah.
You don't really think Victorian era buildings and things, like big factories and plumes of smoke coming out as being particularly eco. But because they don't have luxury of importing everything from China made out of chemicals that don't even exist yet, what they end up with is an actual really quite sustainable building practice. Because one, they can't afford to throw out away. Two, they can't afford to get out from a million miles away. So they end up just using what they've got available to them. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to look back in history, cherry pick all the best bits out, and then try and persuade people to be a bit more sustainably minded and by proxy traditionally minded in new builds and things.
Yeah. Do you think sustainability is a buzzword?
Yes. The biggest problem that we have, or the biggest problem that we see with industry, is the ability for people to just slap eco or sustainable or recyclable on something and then people buy it.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of through thought that actually goes into why is it eco? Why is it sustainable? Why is it what it says on the tin?
Yeah.
It's one of the biggest things that we come across is just bolting insulation to the side of houses. It's eco and this and that.
I've done loads of it before I got educated.
but this is the thing, and it's
Yeah.
We'll say now, what we always say is that all we say here, it's not necessarily angled at set trade base or anyone that's actually doing it day to day. It's a lack of education, it's a lack of understanding our traditional buildings work.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done things like what you said. Everybody's done it. Everybody's done things that...
Yeah, mate, I've injected walls because that's what my client wanted. I've fitted external wall insulation to solid wall properties because that's what the client wanted. But if the government are pushing a scheme out, CESP, Eco, Green Deal and the likes, they're paying for it. One assumes as an employee that it's the right thing to do, right?
Well, this is... I was going to ask you, how did you get from point you were at there to point you're at now? Because you were, from my research, trained by one of the most prestigious organisations in the world, British Army.
Yeah.
So I'm going to assume they ain't teaching on this stuff.
Correct. Yeah.
So how have you got from injecting your walls and stuff to the point that's got to now?
Mate, it's a great question. And I love how you flip the interview on its head and I'm getting asked the question. That's fucking ace. How did I get there? So, yeah, as you say, I learned my trade bricklaying in the forces. 95 I joined. 3-year, sort of three. I don't call it. It's not called an apprenticeship in the military, but it's what the civvy equivalent would be. So 3 years learning it, and then, as you say, we only learned modern methods. So sand and cement, bricks, 1 on 2, 1 on 2, build a corner, build a fucking house. That simple as that. And then lots and lots of theory on top. Practiced it in unit, and then I left the military, 2007. Went straight into corporate management because I'd rose through the ranks in the army and became a section commander, which is civvy equivalent of sort of site manager, project manager. So the natural transition for me to move from the army into Civvy Street was to go into corporate construction management. That's kind of what I was doing in the army. And again, I went to work for global organisations. I won't name them, but I worked for big companies delivering multi-million-pound projects, all doing things in what we see people making those mistakes even still today. And I got curious by following a chap called Peter Ward. I'm sure you've come across him. Yeah. And I saw him behaving on the internet in builders forums, trades groups, and it was a brave thing to do. You know, I'm going back 5 years now, maybe. And he was in these groups, like, I won't say slating everybody, but he was pointing out what they were getting wrong and why. And I got really curious as to his approach, because I like to be divisive. I like to split opinion, and I like to see both sides of a story. So I got curious and I started following him along and thinking, actually, what he's saying makes fucking sense. Yeah. And then I did a course out in Wales. I have to do that when I'm doing a compass in my head, West Wales, and it was a place called CAT, the Centre of Alternative Technologies, which was it's a training centre carved in the side of a quarry in the mountains of Wales. Brilliant course. And the guy was a heritage specialist, and he was teaching line pointing and line render. And I thought to myself at the time, this is a niche I need to be having in my construction business. The blokes are charging 200 quid a metre for this, and sand and cement's like 20. Let's get into the lime game. But when I started learning the theory of this guy, I'm thinking, what you're saying makes sense as well. So then I started reading and started studying more, and I became obsessed with, I'm an obsessive learner anyway, and I became obsessed with not knowing it all, but sort of looking at things from a different perspective. I'd been building sand and cement for 20, 30 years, and to be given this new, like, everything you've been doing your whole life is fucking wrong. Yeah. And you go, and I'm not saying building out sand and cement is wrong, but it needs to be applied at the right time on the right type of property. And I'd renovated all these properties, just come in, dot and dabbed all the plasterboard on, fucking spreading the pink all over the gaff, and then you go, actually, like, I fucked loads of buildings doing that.
But this is what I mean, right? And that's why I should question, right? Because so that's coming in at it, let's say relatively, from a much higher position than myself. Yeah. Right? BTEC bricklayer and all that stuff, and you've come in at a corporate level and you've got a really good standard of training behind you. But me and you both sort of left gate with the same level of ignorance, and we seem to have both come about it in pretty much the same way, because our learning about it was exactly the same as what you said. It was literally some guy in a comment section on Facebook screaming that everything was wrong. And then you start having a look into it and you start learning more and more about how these old buildings function. But that's what for us personally, that's the biggest struggle that we've had, is there's no sort of network. There is, it's getting a lot better. There are people like Leaguey from Yorkshire Lime Company, he's going out and doing things at colleges, and like you said, Peter Ward and Nigel Coxby, and there's a lot of sort of, there's a lot of educational resources out there, but there's no sort of, I guess, like building or place or organisation that you can kind of go and knock on the door and go, what is all this about? and that's what I think needs to get a lot better, so that it prevents what you've just said you've done, and I've done to a certain extent, pink on walls and all that stuff. It would be nice if we could sort of properly segregate in minds of aspiring tradespeople. This is a old building, this is the network or framework or whatever that you need to be working in, the people you need to be dealing with, and this is a new build or new type construction, and this is framework you need to be operating in. For me personally, what I think it is I think it's controversial to say, an over reliance on building regulations and national standards. The thing, for me personally, what gives traditional buildings such a sort of interest and beauty about them is regional diversity, right? What that gets down in Cornwall, it's never going to be the same as what you're going to get up in northern Scotland.
Totally.
They're not going to have thatched roofs. I know they have thatched roofs, but it's not a particularly standardised thing of doing. When you just sit down in an office in London and you've never been to a particularly drizzly day in Sheffield or something like that, and you say, oh, well, this is just a national standard of how it's done, you end up with these issues that come right off of it, because what's going to work down Cornwall is not necessarily going to work up in northern Scotland. But if you've just got a book that says, look, these are the regs, this is how it works, and that's why I'd like to see a sort of network of, I don't know, the southeast, these are the standard traditional building practices, the southwest or the northeast or something like that, something that's a lot more region specific and a lot more diverse in its outlook than what you get on the sort of national level. And I think that's a problem that a lot of young builders and people like that are dealing with, because you've got maybe like what some crackpot on Facebook is saying, and then you've got the national building regulations.
Yeah, totally get it.
If you start operating outside of them national regulations, well, you're a bad builder.
Yeah.
But you're not at the same time. It's sort of
to be. I get it. Yeah.
It's a bit of a case of sort of art's in the right place, but you can struggle in terms of bureaucracy. You can struggle in terms of red tape on what's right way to do stuff. That's why there needs to be some sort of network out there, or some sort of resource, or some sort of collection of people that have got this knowledge to spread out there. The SPAB, Society for Protection of Ancient Buildings, they're a really good resource, but well, I'm going to assume they're quite thin on ground. They've got a lot of work and a lot of dedicated, wonderful people, and people that will spend a lot of time helping people out to preserve buildings, but they just don't have the resources that they need, and the network and the connections and all that stuff. And that's why lots of things that are said on, say, Facebook or social media and things about what builders are doing to old properties, the builders, I don't think they get up in the morning and think, oh, how can we ruin this property, like what you said.
Totally, mate. Yeah, totally. It's such a valid point. Like, you can only do the best with the knowledge that you have in that moment in time. And you and I have both just discussed there that we're both open-minded enough to explore the fact that actually there could be a better way, there could be a different way. You know, just because this new thing is what everybody else is doing, we're open-minded enough to look.
Well, that
the Victorians, they knew what they was doing, right?
Well, this is the thing. Is sort of, I am a staunch traditionalist, right? I do think that we had better ways of doing some things, right? But some modern ways are way better than traditional. It's just how they're applied and the understanding and how these buildings go together. It is always sort of the education, the network, the heart is usually in the right place of the builder. It's just the fact that there's nothing out there that they can sort of communicate with. I mean, Facebook's been pretty instrumental for a lot of these people sort of communicating, and it's come organically, and a lot of it, I mean, for me personally, so my dad were a builder, his dad were a builder, his dad before him and his dad before him. It's my great granddad owned a building company. There's a note somewhere in a book about his company, Parkin and something limited. But I sort of looked at that and I thought to myself, like, why is everything that they built really sort of good and beautiful and sort of in keeping with its surroundings in keeping with its surroundings as much as it possibly can be? And why is some of the stuff that I'm building now feel alien and a bit plastic and a bit not grounded in a time? And what I think it is I think it's two things. I think first of all it's an over-reliance on importing, which is really good for feeding into the sort of sustainability camp, right? And there were people out there that, you said it's a buzzword, but I think that can be a good thing. Because if it's a buzzword, it's going to start attracting people over to stuff, so you can start having a proper conversation about it. But these building materials, these things that you're using, are of the surroundings in a traditional sense, and that lends it to a good degree of sustainability. Whereas the things that we're using now tend to be imported from further afield and a bit more not really of the environment around them. And I think it's when builders, the boots on the ground chaps, have had that disconnect from, I do it this way, from this hill, from this quarry, from whatever, because that's how my dad did it, and his dad before him. Once you start removing that and you start placing in their shirt and tie men, for want of a better word, box ticking, you end up with the people are not as connected to the materials that they're using because there's no sort of cultural sort of link to it, and it ends up, for me personally at least, end up just feeling like a cog in a machine. You're just sort of producing things that you've got no real connection to. You don't really understand them, so then you don't understand how they go together, so you end up feeling a bit disjointed in the industry, and then, relatively speaking, I think the pride starts to go, because you don't know what it is, how it goes together. You just become a cog in a machine. And I don't think that applies to traditional builders. I think if you could sit me and my great-great-grandfather down and question us about where does this brick come from and how does it go together and why does it go together and all this stuff, it'd have a heck of a better scope at how all this building sort of gels than I would, even now, or the average builder on the street. And I don't think that's the builder's fault. I think it's sort of I think it's sort of no jobs for old men anymore. I think old men that used to understand this and take pride in it and foster this understanding of the cohesion and all that good stuff, I think they just don't exist anymore. I think they get retired off and they get replaced by people that tick boxes. And I don't think it creates the same sort of degree of understanding in the younger generations of builders, sort of why you're doing what you're doing. And I don't think that's really fair.
When does, in your opinion, when does functionality become purism?
Oh, there's a good question. So, not to go on a tangent.
Go for a tangent.
You said you were from Rotherham, right? So you've...
We don't tell many people that, we keep that in secret.
I said you were from there, I was from there. So modernity, at the minute, seems to put at the forefront functionality above all else, and almost a sense of wanting everyone to know that it is being functional, right? And that's good, right? Because you want things to function. However, if you're from a northern town like us, right? In the 1960s, they cleared all the slums out and they built these palaces of functionality, right? These big concrete blocks that were to house masses. And as anyone like me that grew up in early 2000s, at some point in your life, if you're from one of them northern towns, you'll have been to watch them get blown up. Because you always see these tower blocks getting blown up in these big northern towns. And it's that thing of modernity as it stands at the moment, with its emphasis on functionality, or rather wishing everyone to know that they're being expressly functional, tends to foster or create architecture and buildings that are quite unpalatable, there's no connection to them because they don't really encapsulate the environment around them as though they're part of something. I was reading something last night about ornamentism, and it's sort of, driving down here, right, you drive through a little village, a little stone village, and there's a church in the corner, And the windows are made out of these beautiful pieces of carved stone. They all come round in circles and the glass is made to fit. That's ornamentism, it's ornamental. And in the 1960s, this chap, whose name I cannot remember, decided that that wasn't really the way to move forward, right? Ornamentism's a bit decadent and a bit of the past, right? So everything now must be a sort of square box of concrete because everybody needs you to know that you're being functional. But I don't see why we can't have a bit of both. I don't see why we can't have a bit of ornamentism here while still being functional. I just don't see why modern buildings and architecture and all needs everybody to know that it's being functional. You see when that sort of leads into where your purist thing comes from. I don't think there's anything wrong with making things look nice.
Yeah.
I know beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but still I think we could foster a great sort of, we could do a lot better with what we have to create crafts and subsequent jobs if we were to put these things back on a pedestal again and say that actually we don't need to let everyone know that we're being functional all the time. I suppose the modern world plays into it a bit because, I don't know, back in Victorian era, if you wanted to show off, you'd have some nice pillars built and a decadent chimney with dog-tooth cobbling going all the way around. But now you just have a sports car. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally, yeah.
So I think there's a societal thing to it more than all, but I think if you do genuinely go out to people and try and explain it to them like what we're doing here, they will stop and look at Lincoln Cathedral or something like that and think, well, hang on a minute, we could do it then, and not change that much, really. I mean, if it's got easier, so why can't we do it now? Why does everything have to be like a post-Soviet brutalist landscape where everything kind of has to be overtly functional to show everyone that you're not being decadent? Well, sometimes a bit of decadence, nice. You know, I mean, I don't think in 100 years anybody's going to go around a Khrushchev housing complex and look at it in the same way that they'll look at Lincoln Cathedral.
No, of course not.
That's the thing. There's something in them. For us personally, we think that it's using your environment to create things with a huge degree of skill, granted, as opposed to just making everything, I guess, semi-political, overtly sort of, look at us, we're not being decadent. Well, that's our sort of, that's where we think the delineation between sort of traditionalist views in construction start to end and you get the modern approach.
Yeah.
I think everything's a little bit too functional.
Yeah.
I think we've got a little bit too good at producing things.
Yeah. What, tell me more about Oxhorn Limeworks. Because the name, and I know this is not true, but the name implies you mine it, you mine lime.
Well, so, right, so Oxhorn come from when me and my pal started pottering about doing little pointing jobs and things that we were doing. We had a brush that we made out, got like a Oxhorn handle on it, right, and we'd use it to beat off and brush your work off like you do at end of day. And then when we were chatting, we'd say, oh, what's left to do on this? So it needs Oxhorn on it. So we just ran with Oxhorn. Limeworks is just a sort of general encapsulation of the sort of things that we do. It's sort of to provide an overview of, we offer lime pointing, lime plastering, lime construction. The key ingredient, let's say, in traditional buildings is lime, and the reason why is because we just simply don't have the ability, let's say, to create modern cements and sort of on a mass-produced scale. It does exist, but it's that thing, sort of job we're doing at the minute, right, in South Anston in South Yorkshire. If you stand on scaffolding and you look directly in front of you, there's a road called Quarry Lane, and then at the back of that there's a road called Limekiln Lane. And it's because when it were a quarry, They'd take out any stone that were worth building with, dress it, leave it over at winter, and then build out of it. And then any stone they come across that were limestone, they'd just wipe down to Limekiln Lane, burn it to make your sand, to make your mortars with, and plasters and paints. I think we've sort of forgot just how region-specific stuff is, and just how simple things used to be. And that's what we're trying to do with Oxhorn Limeworks. We're trying to sort of scale it back a bit. We're trying to explain to people that sometimes you need a bit of a simpler solution. Just because something's quicker and faster and easier and stronger and better, it don't mean that it's right for that particular thing. The Limeworks bit is more sort of us trying to explain that we understand sort of the necessity of it in regards to traditional buildings.
So when you're in your sales skin and you're seeing a customer, maybe he's got some damp work that needs fixing, or some apparent damp, moisture in the walls, should we call it, and the solution is, look, you need to have your external facade needs to be, all that sand and cement render needs to come off. We're going to repoint it with lime. We're going to hack all that plasterboard off the inside. I'm going to whack you a new lime render on the internally. What's the common objection to that? I've got my thoughts on what I think it is.
So it's a bit, I don't know, it's a bit weird for us, right? Because 9 times out of 10, everybody's been and tried modern solutions and have whittled it down to it just being us. So
people are going through the pain to then realise, actually...
we...
So you're saying that the lime is people's last resort?
It depends on what you're dealing with, right? So if you're dealing with a building that's listed, or it's got a conservation officer, that's kind of a good network in a sense, because you've got somebody who's going to be giving you a long list of things you can't do, and then you can whittle sort of out from that what you can do. So they're quite good, because I don't know, tank it, plasterboard it, whatever you want to do. Conservation officers, no. Not every house is listed. Some houses that should be listed aren't listed, and some houses that are really, really old aren't listed, and some houses that are newer are listed. So we're not a one-size-fits-all type of thing. Lime isn't a miracle cure-all that will solve all your problems. Again, that plays into regional diversity. Everything's very different, very ad hoc. So when we're going out to a customer, they've done a lot of groundwork themselves, and this is what I keep hammering on with network. They usually sort of have to struggle or get things done that are not correct or wrong or whatever, and then they eventually come to us and say, oh, we've sort of tried all the modern solutions, what's cracked with traditional solution? And then that's where we come in. So we don't have, honestly, we have too many objections. I think a better way to get at what you're getting at, it's when somebody's not had that, and somebody doesn't have a house that, let's say, they believe is grandiose enough or old enough, for want of a better word, to require Limeworks. But that's not the case for a lot of people. A lot of people live in terrace houses, and actually lime is a really, really good thing for those properties. It's not it can be a necessity. It's very important. There are cases where it doesn't matter, there are cases where it does. But as a general rule, anything built pretty much before the Second World War, it's a good bet that you're going to want some lime in there. And that's really just to do with pore structure. It's really just to do with what's called breathability and capillary action and those types of things. But I think a lot of people have a framework in their mind, oh, it's just a terraced.
I agree, totally.
But this, and for us personally, right, we wouldn't, I mean, your meterage might come into it. So, if you've got a great big massive stone house, so it's going to cost a lot more because there's just more of it. If it comes down to like a standard square metre price, we wouldn't charge any more for a big grandiose old townhouse. I mean, there might be a little bit more incurred paperwork if you're dealing with a listings department, something like that. But we think that a bit of a damp terrace in Rotherham deserves as much love and care and attention and, you know, thinking about it as some great manor house up, you know, Chatsworth does. And I don't think a lot of people think like that, and I think that's where a lot of problems, or that's where we would come across our most objections.
Yeah, I guess, like, from me just rewinding to my original question, I guess by virtue of them ringing and speaking to Oxhorn Limeworks, they're already committing to the fact that they need lime work, right?
Yeah.
So by virtue of them coming to you, I'm guessing that they've already been through that pain and realised, actually, lime is my solution. That guy I saw on the internet is right. This is the thing I need. So I guess that someone that, we'll use property investors, because that's who I work with. You get a property investor, buys a mid-terrace in Rotherham, gets the keys, opens the door, sees the damp line, sees me on Facebook and goes, oh, this is that lime stuff that idiot keeps fucking banging on about. So let's go and ask this. I'll Google it. Yeah. Local lime plasterer, you come up, then you go around. Are you ever in a situation like that?
That's what I'm saying. That's where we find the majority of our objections.
Yep.
From people that just assume a terraced house is a bit standard and a bit boring.
Yeah.
But what we would then say, impose upon that customer is, look, this house is from 1902, right? And you're expecting it or trying to make it function day to day as to the standards that you would for a new build. But if I give you a car from 1902, there's no way on God's green earth you'd ever expect it to function as your car out in car park does now. You wouldn't expect it to have aircon and all this stuff. I don't think people really take into consideration just how old a lot of the British housing stock is. That's where we find the majority.
I love that analogy. It's brilliant, that.
Do you know why it is? Because there's that Morris Minor in the car park. We're looking at it.
That's probably 1902. That thing out there, yeah.
But that's the thing. It's very difficult for the average person, I think, and from what I've seen and what I've dealt with, to properly comprehend just how old a lot of the British housing stock is, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, it's if they're sort of looked after, right, and you put a bit of care and a bit of time and a bit of attention, and you listen to boring people like us talk about that, you can get kind of a lot more out of them. We deal a lot of time with, what about buzzwords of sustainability, a lot of sort of eco companies and people that are trying to get better U values and heat retention out of properties, and we said to them, look, you're dealing with something that's very, very, very old. You need to have, or you at least need to factor that in when you're thinking about things. You need to factor in the fact that you're dealing with something that's extremely old and is designed to function in a way that's pretty antiquated now. So what can we do in the scope of what's available to us that's not going to detract from that, but it's going to help it? That's why we big fans of hemp lime fibre. So it's essentially traditional lime plasterwork that's mixed with hemp, because hemp's got fantastic heat retentive properties. So we can actually increase heat retention in a property. But the problem that we then have, if you're a property investor or something, you're trying to, again, it goes back into government regulations, you're trying to flip this building, this really old workhouse, something, turn it into flats, so on and so forth. You've got a heck of a lot of government criteria and hoops to jump through to get it to meet a modern standard, and we really, really think that's a problem, because you cannot impose those modern standards on traditional homes, like analogy with car, right? So instead of looking at heat reflection or weak points, windows and so on, well, why don't we look at heat retention? Why don't we look at how much heat we can retain in that property for a sustained period of time with, say, a hemp lime fibre plaster or wood wool fibre boarding situation, instead of having this, again, one size fits all solution to everything. Maybe we can make things a little bit more tailored and a little bit more bespoke, and then that can create some some more sort of industries for people that can work in, that can do this type of work, and it can give the consumer some more options. But the first thing that we're trying to do, at least, is just get it out there that, look, if you're buying something that's 140 years old, you've got to have it in the back of your mind that it's from a time that's 140 years ago, and it's going to function in that way and act that way. And there are things that you're going to have to do that will be a bit more, say, labour intensive or time consuming than a new build would. But then I think that's a good thing, because then you can say to people, surely that's going to increase the new build sort of people wanting to buy a new build. That's the thing. There seems to us, at least, to be a great sort of war between traditionalist builders and modernist builders, and it's all my sister. It should just be a sort of segregated industry where, look, if you want modern standards and modern requirements and all that good stuff, well, then you can buy a modern house. If that information's there to you, look, it's going to be like this and this and this, and it's the same for traditional camp. It's an old house, it's going to be a bit drafty, it's going to need windows opening in summer and all this good stuff. If you can lay it out to people, well, it sounds like more people are going to want to live in a new build than a traditional home. But if you've got that knowledge there, you don't end up with this sea of sort of issues that people have that when you meet and they say, oh, if I were to renovate an house again, I'd never renovate an old one. Do you know what I mean? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Anybody listening is that'd shoot me if I didn't ask this question.
Right.
Does rising damp exist?
Oh, there is a question, right? And it's a question for men considerably more educated than myself, right?
Yeah.
So, there's two schools of thought. The first is that rising damp, as it is a symptom of a greater problem, which, we know that for a fact. There are many times when diagnosed rising damp is just the symptom of a problem. Which is what damp is. Damp is a symptom of a problem. Whether or not it can occur independently is a different conversation. So I'm going to give you a fantastic sort of politician's answer.
Love it.
And just sort of say, yes.
Just ask me one back. Yeah, that's what politicians do, yeah.
I'll be honest, I don't know the answer. Right? I know Peter Ward's very firm in the sense of, look, it's been tried in laboratory. There we go. It's been tried in scientific senses, and it can't be recreated. And then there are people that say, well, every, let's say, list of problems it could be, we've fixed them all and it's still there, so it must be something. But what I will say is, and this is just my opinion, it's not backed up by any sort of formal credentials or all. My theory is, let's say we build a substrate a while, right? And it's naturally hygroscopic, it's capillary active, right? It's got a very open pore structure. And it's designed to be like that, it's fine, right? So lets a bit of water in, lets it dry out, lets a bit of water in, lets it dry out, right? And that's emblematic at the time, because that, relatively speaking, is all they've got to deal with. That's all they've got, so that's how they have to make them work, right? And then that building's there. It never changes if you don't fiddle with it. You sympathetically repair it and so on, and there's no DPC in it, there's no drilled chemical, whatever, right? And that house is there and it's functioning perfectly fine. But what about when you change everything around it? So let's say it's built in, I don't know, 1700 and whatever, right? And it's a field all the way around, full of woods and greens and all that good stuff. And every time the rainwater comes onto it, it soaks in and the plants drink it and it takes the water away. Well, then you build a road, then you build a housing estate, then you start cutting the trees down. And all of a sudden, you've got all this area around the property that would have been a sea of greenery, sucking water in every time it rains. It's gone. Now it's all cascading to this traditional home that's not designed to deal with that level of moisture in the ground. When you take an old cobblestone road that they uncover, and that water just drains straight through. Now it's tarmac and it comes off. I don't know, there's good drainage and stuff, but you get the point I'm making.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily the traditional buildings that change. I think it's every bloody thing around them that changes, and then they just can't cope. And I would be willing to make an argument that that could be perceived as rising damp. Look, let's see, it's designed to deal with a pint of water, because the trees, everything's sucking it up. When you get rid of them, now it's starting to have 3, 4, 5, 6 pints of water. Well, it can't deal with it. That would be my take on rising damp. That would be my sort of politician's level of input.
Yeah, do you think we'll ever know? Do you think we'll ever know that whether there's a definitive it exists or it does not? Do you think that'll ever come? Or do we think we've got the two camps, like, they're so divisive, aren't they? The two camps, they're so divided, should I say, in that we've got two very polarised opinions. One being the rising damp is a thing, we fucking inject holes in walls and stick cheese strings in them and that'll solve the problem. And then we've got your traditionalist purists like you and I that are all about breathability of that building and using the correct products in order to allow that moisture to wick out, evaporate, or whatever it's going to do. And because those opinions are held so strongly by both camps, I don't think there's ever a middle ground. And I know you just tried to land on the middle ground with your political answer, but I don't think that exists. I think you're either in or out.
I think, to be frank with you, there's way too much money in either camp for anyone.
Oh, totally, yeah.
If we're going to be honest about it.
Yeah, and they're both extreme profitability, right?
Well,
like if you go to a house and you give it a full lime renovation, we're big bucks, aren't we? Let's be honest.
Well, I mean, that depends, right? I mean, it is considerably cheaper to use a modern system.
Yes.
That's why we use modern systems, and that's good, because then the consumer gets a cheaper product.
It's cheaper and quicker, but it's wrong.
But what I'd like to see is more of a network in this and more people going into it, so that there are more people in the game, so that the prices get lower, so that we can actually start fostering a real sense of traditional practices. So a good example might be, look, so plaster this room, right? Plasterboard, stickers plasterboards in on a day, tape up, scrimp, all that good stuff, plaster over it, gypsum, next day, get a skim, we're away. We've got 2 days there. Well, let's say they charge £150 a day, just as an example. Well, let's say we're going to do it with lime, right? Well, there's a heck of a lot of time that goes into it. So let's say we can stick a scratch coat on first day. Well, that's 1 day, 150 quid, whatever. And then let's say we're going to leave it a week, come back, then we stick a devil coat on. And then we're going to leave it another week, we're going to stick a fine finishing coat on. It would be nice to see each one of those lime days at the same rate as a modern plasterer, so that it can become more accessible for the customer base. I don't think it necessarily needs to cost way more. I think there just needs to be an understanding and an admittance for the extra labour that's going to be involved in it. So, like, hypothetically, you could say, oh well, it plastered and boarded, it took 2 blokes 150 quid. Well, this one would take 3 days over a 3-week period at 150 quid. So I think it's better for the plasterer, because he gets extra days work out of it, and the customer just sort of accepts, look, it's going to be more labour intensive, it might not necessarily be more expensive. It's more expensive at the moment because there just aren't the people doing it. It's just
that's just the law of supply and demand, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what we'd like to see. We'd like to see more supply to meet the demand, so that it stops becoming unachievable for a lot of people.
Yeah, because the materials are abundant, right?
Oh God, you want to go out Buxton, we've got just like a sea of limestone out there, and this is thing that we always talk about. We can do it here. We can. We've got the geology, the skills to do it. We've just got, in my opinion, addicted to a cheap, quick import system. And I don't think it's sustainable at all. Because if well, let's say these countries that we buy everything off, if they run out
Well, it's
or
not
whatever.
sustainable. You can't put fucking plasterboard in a skip these days.
No, but that's...
Lime, you can just fucking knock it back up again the next day.
Genuinely, do you want to know what I do, at least, with chip some old lime plaster off, or sort of sweepings up from end of day? The only thing I want to do with that is I take it to my dad, who's got an allotment, and he puts it in ground on his allotment, because it's lime rich, it's fibrous, it's all pretty much organic matter. I mean, you can knock it up if you want, but it's a bit lumpy. But that's what I mean. That's you can't. That's what I keep saying about properly segregating the industry. Let's look at the pros and let's look at the cons and have a sensible and reasonable conversation, and then we can outline it to customers and say, look, in some instances your hands will be tied on the traditional front. In some instances your hands will be tied on modern front, because I can't see anybody on a new build Baritone wanting to pay us to do 3 coats of line fibre. But we say, look, we've got a very sustainable, very local way of producing these paints, plasters and mortars and other such building stuff. If that's what you're into, that's what you're interested in, well, you can come over here and we can do it. If you're more interested in a quicker, more efficient, more cost-effective way of doing things, well, then we can have a chat about doing it in the modern camp. A good example, right, of what we say about it is, because I know the sort of arguments of, well, the whole industry's geared this way, you can't just stop doing it tomorrow. Beer industry, right? You can remember early 2000s, what were they? Carlin?
Yeah, Carlin, John Smiths.
There you go, Carlin, John Smith, that's all you could get. Even in relatively nice establishments and sort of back pubs, that were all you had. But now you can go in quite a rough pub on a council estate somewhere.
10 different beers on the go.
There's 10 different beers, and one of them's been made by some farmer in a shed somewhere,
what
10 miles away.
What a fantastic analogy that is as well.
But that's the thing, there is clearly a precedent in industries to diversify and put at the forefront localisation. I cannot think of a reason why we can't do that in the building industry. And there are leaps and bounds in the past 20 years that's come across with sort of sheep's wool insulation, all this stuff. And if you think about the knock-on effect it has for other industries, go back to beer brewing, I'm sure that these farmers that in 2000s could only sell to Carlin or John Smiths are probably buzzing that now there's 15 little guys in sheds somewhere all bidding on the wheat, you know, I want some of the good stuff. So I don't see why the construction industry, that model can't be applied to construction industry, and the more of it that happens, the cheaper it becomes for customer. So that's one thing we'd like to see, and I think it's possible. Again, I'm not some mad autarchist. I don't want to stop importing everything, so we're all going to go back to using traditional and wear shirts and ties and flat caps when we go to work, you know. But I do think we can have two industries that run side by side, and I don't think one's going to particularly pinch off the other in terms of work. So I think it's possible. It'd be very nice to see.
It would, mate. It would.
But this is, like, you go out to Buxton, right? And this was like about like industrial Britain. If you go out to Buxton or some tiny little village in Yorkshire, right? And you walk around and you'll see all these old stone houses and these beautiful farmers' fields, and you'll always find some sort of factory or some sort of foundry or some sort of mill or something, right? And it's such an, you know, if you sort of looked at that in the modern context, it's a really odd thing to see. Because you're going to build now, like a big field, and you're going to build an idyllic village. Well, you wouldn't put like a knife and fork making plant in the middle of it, would you?
No.
But they blend in lovely to the environment, and they can be quite symbiotic. I think we need to accept, everyone, that industry's got to exist. We've got to have people making things because we need things. So instead of doing the sort of 1960s route of centralising it all in Attercliffe, right, and making it look quite horrible, if we had a more sporadic approach to it and we had these little cottage industries that were supplying things, I think we don't tend to lose the beauty of the landscape, and we can create these really sort of ad hoc, individual, local people making local things for the local area. Same with beer. Yeah.
You should be in fucking government, you mate. Shouldn't he? Mate, before we sign off, what's the dream?
Like my personal or business?
Both.
So my personal dream is I want to buy a field, right, with enough stuff in it so that I can completely build my house. Like, as in, get the clay myself, mine the lime myself, burn the lime myself, all that stuff.
Class.
I want to see if it's possible.
Yeah.
Right. It may fall down, but because I know it can be done like that, so I'd like to do it on a micro level to see whether it would be scalable. In terms of business dreams, I think we'd like to start dealing with other companies that are the first port of call for, say, aspiring young tradespeople or surveyors or customers, so that we can get a proper, like, understanding of the segregation of the industry. So, and it's getting a lot better. We're talking to surveyors all the time that are singing from the same hymn sheet, so that when that first point of call happens, you're being sort of steered in the right direction, so that we don't end up with two camps that are really balkanised, that hate each other. You know, like, oh, I'm modern this and traditional this. It'd just be nice to have a sort of filter system in place. That's why we've been really impressed with information that you were putting out in regards to solid walls and all that kind of stuff, because you are going to be the first point of call for property investors, for homeowners and so on, so that you can properly filter them out and say, look, you can be equipped with the knowledge so that you're not going to make any mistakes that might be considerably more costly than doing it right the first time. That's where we'd like to be. We'd like to be I'd like to be educating young lads so they don't have to make the hundreds of mistakes I've made.
Yeah, nice. What a nice mission. Yeah, mate, thanks for coming over, been a pleasure to talk to you.
No problem, thanks for having us.
Thanks for sticking around till the end. All the social handles from both of us are below. I'll see you in the next one.